I'd like to welcome whoever is viewing this virtually. My name is Heath Bolton, and I'm chair of the Cincinnati School Board's Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee, and we're having our monthly meeting. And before we get fully started, we're going to go around the horn and introduce the folks that are here. If you would, introduce yourselves.
Brandon Craig, board member.
Jennifer Wagner, Treasurer and Chief Financial Officer.
Kimberly Hughes, Assistant Treasurer.
Kevin Ashley, Director of Financial Reporting and Transparency in the Treasurer's Office.
Phyllis Davis, the Board's Administrative Assistant.
And Rob Wilson, Tech.
Great, thank you. And Rob, if you'll do the bit of narration regarding participation virtually, if indeed we have anyone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good morning. If you'd like to speak during the section of the hearing of the public today, you have 15 minutes to let us know. Please give us your name, your association, and your school. And please click the hand icons so you can be recognized. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate you doing that, since you're the man in charge of if they start to speak or need to speak or communicate with us. It's great. I appreciate it. We have a little bit of a different agenda, and some of it's quite, I think the new word to use is organic, and that some of the stuff with the Ohio report card and what have you has just really occurred as recently as yesterday, and has been updated even as we speak. So, but we'll get started, and we have an agenda that we can actually start on number 1 if we are able to do that. Madam
Yes.
Treasurer?
So Superintendent Wright sends her apologies for not being able to attend. She's in the Columbus at the Ohio 8 superintendent meeting, and so asked me to speak on her behalf. So the carryover item from the last meeting was clear directions on how vendors can start doing business with CPS. And so the district website has been updated. There's a little button where you can do doing business with CPS, and then there's some links click on as a new supplier registration. And there's even a quick tutorial if anybody needs assistance. So they've responded to the board's request to have a clear direction.
Thank you. And I think that particularly was board member Moffitt that was particularly interested in that, having spoken with some folks that felt the original that we had on the website was a bit confusing, and hopefully this is less confusing. And when we say doing business with CPS, who would those people be? What types of folks would that be, Madam Treasurer?
Anybody who wants to become a vendor for the district or enter into a contractual relationship to provide a good or a service. We must first register them as vendors. We have legal obligations to vet every vendor through the terrorist watch system and financial credit bureaus before we're allowed to do business with them. So it takes a little bit of a minute to do that. There's also directions on how to stay on top of what RFP packages are coming out. So if we're doing a new package on or a new bid on buying buses, and you're a bus vendor and you want to know, stay on top of that.
What a great example.
I knew that was hot on your mind.
That's right.
But for any reason, there's requirements on anything that would cost a district over $100,000 for us to do a formal RFP, which stands for request for proposal, and then a vendor is selected from that competitive, it's not a formal bid, but proposing, and then they can register and start doing business with us.
Would that include people that want to do business for a particular individual school as well? Okay.
Yes. Any of the 65 schools or central office department.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions? Comments?
No, I mean, I think, any way that we can make some of these processes work smoother and easier is best. The thing I think also might be helpful that we do, and this is more on a board and the district level, central office level, is just to make sure that the schools themselves know to utilize some of these resources in a better way, because I think that's where probably a lot of this struggle is that someone wants to do business with the district can figure out how to do business with the district. Somebody wants to do a specific project at a specific school or specific work at a specific school they know there's a need, it probably is not as clear.
That's an excellent point. I made a note. I know our new COO, Chris Burkhart, is working very hard on improving process, documenting processes and improving them. So we will, I'll pass that on to him, and possibly he can get on the next principal agenda.
That's great.
Mhm.
Good comment. And now within that top item as well, we have a little bit of a review and somewhat of a limited discussion about the levy materials that are becoming available. We are under certain restrictions about what we can and cannot say, but it's a public meeting and it's finance committee, and we're talking in terms of a levy that's allowed.
Yes, it's a revenue generating opportunity for the district. And as I provide the financial information for all the materials, this is an early draft. It was even before we had our issue number, which is issue number 3. And it needs to be reviewed and edited for the release of the report card yesterday, just to make sure that statements that we're making in here are still accurate. So we need to, I'll let the superintendent review that. But so if you would review it and let me know if there's any changes or updates, or is there anything missing that we need to add to the documentation, we appreciate it. So what I handed to you was 101 about election day, and then the FAQs that were typically frequently asked questions that were typically asked during any levy cycle.
So on the first side, it's kind of a civics lesson. And on the back side, is that the only information that we are?
That's what was shared with me prior to getting received. So I do want to point out there is a website of the levy committee that is privately funded, not any district dollars, but it's yes for CPS, and FOR is spelled out. So it's on the front of that voting 101. So if you want to see any updated materials or progress or anything like that, you can go to that website for more information. It's fully funded by non-CPS, by an organization called CASE, the Cincinnatians Active to Support Education.
Comments or suggestions?
No, I mean, I think this is good. I think the more that we kind of get folks to think of this levy as really just painting the great work that we're doing, and less about whether it's less about all these other factors that are happening around, and more about maintaining the great work we're doing. That's kind of the key to success there, because the rationale is that really that without this levy, if you think we have struggles in certain areas now, imagine us not having any money to do a lot of these things that are really important.
Right. So $52 million is equal to about 520 teachers.
I think it would be good to have the superintendent check to make sure that according to the new Ohio report card.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And even add some things perhaps, on whether if we're still where we were or we've made better, or deal with what we are facing. I'm interested in the emphasis of the teacher evaluation system as to the amount of play that gets. I know that we're very proud of our teachers and what have you, but it seems to be. I'd probably lead a little bit more with the community learning centers and those things that directly impact the neighborhoods more in that number 8. I'm a little concerned that the good work that you 3 people sitting over there have done, it would seem to me that somewhere we need to assure the public that we have really good financial operations that are tested and retested and actually awarded. I think in these times when people are not trusting anyone,
Mhm.
I think it's important for us to validate the work that our financial house does.
So during the audit committee, I made a statement about having 7 years of clean audits, when in reality, it's been, even though I've been the treasurer for 7 years, we've only been audited 6 times. We're in the 7th audit now. But it was a factual statement. We've had unmodified opinions, which is a clean audit for every year that I've been the treasurer. So that's.
I think that to Jimmy Bolton's point, though, I think that's something that is the highlight of how we have been spending these dollars. It's a way of somewhat bragging without necessarily bragging, because it's really stating truth. But to say, we've done this great job as your fiscal managers of the resources that you've given us. We continue to keep doing more with this same dollar amount.
Right.
We're going to continue to keep doing more with that same dollar amount going forward. So this is, and this is a way to show that we've done it. We continue to trust in us. We will continue to make sure your dollar is spent in a good way.
Yeah, and I think there's some items here. These may be frequently asked questions, but I'm not sure frequently asked questions this time in the way that local and national communities would be the same questions. But I do think you need to emphasize that. And the fact that it probably is in here. It was introduced, as it says, in perhaps 2007, and the voters have renewed it twice since then, if I recall.
That's correct.
And this would be a third renewal. So that also gives people a better, so I think those things need to be approached in here. I know that we have some people that don't talk too much about finances. Well, I'm sorry. People need to be reassured about it.
I will pass those comments on. Thank you.
To include too the vote from the Community Audit Committee. Because I think that's important.
I did report that the audit committee endorsed.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you for taking that back to the superintendent.
You're welcome.
Whomever else. Number 2, we have the strategic plan measures on the finance work plan. And I think Jen has produced that sheet, as has Phyllis produced that sheet for us. Do we have it? Get through that. I think that's going to be kind of quick.
That one. Yes, what I did, you have it in print, and it looks like this. I just.
And just so people, this is 3 years ago.
Yes.
Strategic plan.
We finished the strategic plan last year.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the strategies and measures that were noted on the Finance Committee work plan, the Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee. And so what I did is made copies, and I just starred the ones that were noted on the work plan. And Chair Bolton wanted to review those to see if you wanted to continue them on the work plan or wanted to open it up for discussion.
Yeah. Want to open this up to discussion. I know that the administration's putting together a kind of a checklist for the whole strategic plan as to what we've accomplished, what we haven't accomplished. Should we continue? Should we? So that at least that we have that as we start to develop the new strategic plan. And all 5 of our board committees each had certain things within their work plans that related to the strategic plan. And every one of those committees is going to be doing that. But it's not 5 committees, 4 committees, I think, are going to be doing that. So this would just be one of the things we're doing for our committee. And let's, if we could, kind of quickly go through the student-centered decision-making one, Jen. You'll read that for folks.
Sure. It says to institute an annual budget development and review process that provides multiple points of access to influence an equitable distribution of resources to all students individually or commonly required. And we've been working on this for several years, and each year adding a level of improvement to the equitable distribution of funds. We are now working on developing what we're calling an equity index based on some factors for by building. So the size of the building, the economically or free and reduced lunch percent of students with disabilities, percent of students with English language learners, percent of students who are experiencing homelessness, the reading composite score and the math composite score. And we're coming up with a proposed weighted formula, and then we'll start engaging the board and the community on that logic before we move forward. But we wanted to test the logic. And what's funny was when I did it, and I did it without the academic scores. But we need to find a different way to do the size of the building, because when I did this weighted factor, Walnut Hills became the highest equitable index because of the size of the building.
Right.
So the size is in the opposite direction than all the other measures. And so I need to find a different way to do that. Oh, and the report card is another measure. Got that one. So
Yeah, I think the report card will inform where we go with this for sure.
yes.
When you're doing size of the building, you're doing that outside of, not in connection with per capita, right? Like per student in the building.
That we're doing
Those are two
the
separate.
enrollment of the building, not the size of the physical building.
Okay.
Sorry.
Because I think there is a potential issue with, like, for instance, a building that is, I'm thinking about size and student body in a building. You have some buildings that have same number of students, but because of the differences in the size and the physical size of the building and the resources in the building, 1,000 students looks a lot different at one building than it does at the other. So there's that potential for, to your example of Walnut, there could be a building that's got 1,500 students and they're right at capacity, right? Like they're right in a good space. And you have another building that's 1,500 students and they're over what they can hold and what the resources may be needed for that space. And so I think there may be another way to figure out that size of the student body population that's maybe connected with either classroom levels or, it's a hard one to figure out because every school's got something different, and that's the struggle with you all to do an equity measure.
So the staffing formula, so right now we use what we call student-based staffing. So years ago we used student-based budgeting, and we had difficulty managing that because of the mobility of the students throughout the year. You can't shift resources in the middle of the year like that. So we switched to student-based staffing. So the formulas that are on staffing that are based on the collective bargaining agreement or state and federal law will continue, and this equity index will be applied to everything else. So they'll get weighted money based on the needs of their students to then allocate to the needs of those students. That's the intent. The first philosophy that we discussed, and we need to get consensus on it, is, do we believe that students with higher needs need more financial resources than students with lower needs, based on those factors that we have? And so, and we had some, with students with disabilities, for example, we had a very in-depth conversation about pulling out the self-contained classes versus the inclusion students, because if you have a high number of self-contained classes, that makes a difference in the resources that you need. So, so we had some very interesting. Somebody even suggested looking at the number of foster placed or migrant students as well. So we're at the very beginning of this. It's fascinating work.
Well, you're in the beginning, but we're getting close in the months coming that you're going to have to be able to share. And when you say we so far, that means the leadership administration. That's not necessarily, the board's not yet participating in that discussion.
Correct. That's the next
So
step.
we got some pronoun issues as we go through a transition, like we and whoever. But I think the point about facilities is also an equity issue, the space and the availability of and the safety of the campus. I mean, there's all kinds of things. I don't think it's hard for me to believe after a generation of us having this $1.2 billion facilities master plan that we keep making facilities, I won't say a lower priority, but sort of now we're assuming it's okay. It isn't. We've certainly, the first 10 of our buildings that we've built probably need to have major reviews. So I think facilities is one of the things, to your point. I think that's great. I also absolutely hate the staffing formula, which is top down and universal, and but it is in the collective bargaining. It's nothing we invented, but until we can actually address the need for those differences in staffing.
Well, we're getting ready to soon. Well, within a year, we'll be starting negotiations again, right? And so this could inform a different way of doing things.
It will. So you think we should keep this one?
I'm guessing yes.
Can I add one other thing onto this?
Yeah.
And I think it may also be something that will be helpful as we take that next step with this, looking at that kind of equity and how we allocate resources, is also some of this needs to be driven by certain plans have a different, or certain programs have a different value than other programs.
Right on.
And, to your point with regards to the working with students with disabilities, students who are included into just the general population but have additional needs,
Right.
there are ways that we can also facilitate those additional needs differently, that as we go to look at cost benefit analysis and say, would this investment in this particular piece of technology or this particular program have a greater benefit on the general student population and the students who are have special needs or disabilities. Like, those are things that I think as we get to the granular level on that next stage, we'll get put into that process. And I think so some of that also is really driven by, do we have allocation of resources, even how are we even spending the dollars in an equitable way? So I think at some point we have to get to that part where we can attach some programs to, or some specific values to some programming. Similar to what we were talking about with the budget as a whole, right? Is certain things have a certain value because you can't not pay taxes, or you can't not pay salaries.
Right. Yes, agreed. Okay, so I'll bring back whatever stage we're in to the next finance committee to
That'd
start.
be great.
vetting. Yes.
That'd be great. And if you'll, Phyllis, remember that that's going to be on the agenda for the next month.
Equity budgeting.
I will add, as a person who's been very involved in the efforts to change the Ohio report card, and there's been a number of schools, there's a number of districts involved with that, particularly the urban and near urban or what have you. And there were a group of us that were down in Atlanta for another conference that was very informative. And we were talking about it, and somebody from Miami-Dade, I think, a board member who been a superintendent perhaps, and that's like the fourth largest district, talked about the state report card in Florida and what that means and how that influences what they're doing. But he said, we also do. And I was sitting next to the president of the Toledo board, and it's like, oh, wow, okay. They call it a home measure, meaning, even within the categories that the state sets up, and this is something that the urban network in Ohio has been working on and what have you. And within even just using the state categories, what's the actual home measure that we're looking at?
We used to do our own report card, but people thought we were.
It was like a thing.
Yeah.
A PR
manipulating the data.
Right.
So,
and so it was interesting, and we like that. We even like that terminology, a home measure. And you did the bad and the good. A lot of it did relate to what you're working on this equity index. The equity index can become part of whatever that sort of home measure or that additional publication is. But we want to be held accountable. Nobody's against that, and I think we'll get to the financial pieces that might inform us as well. But I was very impressed with just that term and sticking to the state, but looking at what the home measure was too.
The challenge with this, and I picked up on this again during my my homework for the work that you all are doing with setting goals and guardrails, and I reread the Alma community feedback. there's two conflicting statements in there. One is equitable
Equity.
distribution of funds, and then there's a criticism that the district is not allocating funds equally.
Yeah.
So everybody wants equity until it's not equal, and then they want equal. And so it's really hard. It's going to be really hard to build something that everybody's going to buy into.
And that's why the board has to buy into it, the administration, and we have to then communicate it. I would
Yes.
say, too, that there's a third sentence that relates to that in the ALMA report. It's the equity piece and versus equality or same or what have you, is that there's a sentence or two sentences that actually talk about the word equity itself is divisive. Is what's the better word? I can't remember. They used a really better political term, and I think it is because of that unclear meaning of what equity actually is supposed to be.
Well, it's because it's like beauty. It's in the eyes of the beholder. The definition is in the eyes of the beholder. So it's equity.
But see, the last time you
because of
said
my
that, Carolyn said, "Wait a minute, no,
I think
there's a
the-
definition of equity, but people don't get our particular definition of equity. It's hard."
I think the true challenge in equity is what are you trying to get equitable measurements of? So equitable experiences versus equitable programs and processes. And I think there's a little bit of a measure of both that we are striving for as a district, and that just means us setting a definition for ourselves out there.
Right.
I think to E's point, one of the things that would help in that is by our own measurements of what our schools are doing and where they're succeeding and where there's work to be done, helps you all determine, okay, so if I invest another dollar into this particular school
Right.
for this particular program,
Right.
is that going to get a better result?
Right. And so that actually brings us, that's a great segue to the next point.
Give them
on here.
$5. And
Yeah.
by the way, the word I was looking for, polarizing. That equity is a polarizing term. Couldn't come up with that. It's political. I know it's.
But they want you to take away what they already got.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, we want you to cut, but don't cut my stuff.
And I will say, this is just one board member and one member of finance. I do think that we should ready ourselves and our stakeholders that this coming budget, there will be significant cuts. Because the value of each of those dollars, and I'm not talking about tweaking, I'm talking about some transformative changes.
Well, with 9%
Are needed.
inflation, you just can't
Yes.
buy the same things.
That's right. At the very least, the inflation will make us do that.
Not to mention the cliff that's coming.
Right. We got a cliff, new administration.
I sent my cliff to the Urban Network, Treasures Network.
Good.
Picture of that cliff. Okay, so
Yes, next two.
So to segue from what Board Member Craig was saying is the use of multiple points of data when considering options and making decisions, prioritizing outcomes with the highest impact and best value. So this is the new financial impact pool return on investment effort we're doing. In fact, Kim, Mike, and I are all going to that Edunomics class
Good.
that Ben went to, Mr. Linney went to. And we got a scholarship, so they're paying half our way.
Nice.
But the three of us are going together because we're trying to develop a systemic way to do this work, and that I really like the tool that they came up with. So that's in October, 25th and 26th. I'll be missing audit committee, but
Oh.
so we are still working through this, and so I think this should probably stay.
You think it should stay? I think it should stay. But my preference about the whole return on investment contracts.
I know.
That
So
would
my
be
new
the
contract
easiest
analyst
thing
is
to start.
starting in 2 weeks. He's finishing up all the final expenditure reports for the state and federal grants,
Great.
so that's his priority right now. As soon as
District
that's over, he's going to hit the ground
and
running.
Yes. Okay,
Same
we're
as
going to
Cody
keep that.
Hutchins.
He's going to have a fun job. He'll probably need an armed guard before the whole thing's over.
Easy process. I do think that's the return on investment. I mean, I live by ROI as my life lesson. So, but I think it does extend out to what do we look at curriculum and we're looking at additions to
Programmatic stuff,
programs and
yes,
stuff as well.
yes.
Like, are we getting an additional value? Outcomes going to be better
Right.
as a result of some of these changes.
Right. So one of the easiest, I've kept a running list because I can never remember when I went about it, but of ideas of programmatic or project related things that we need to evaluate. Summer Scholars is the easiest one to talk about.
Oh, yes.
we budgeted 15 million. I don't know where we finalized the spend on it, but what was the per pupil spend for the kids that actually participated, and what were the academic results?
Mhm.
So we'll be working on that. So
Yeah.
my recommendation would be to keep that.
Okay.
The next one is I would really like to spend a lot more time talking about this kind of stuff at Finance Committee.
Let's do.
If the Finance Committee feels like it's a priority. But we've developed key performance indicators for financial measures from the department's productivity, but also we're working on key performance indicators from each budget unit, determine how well financially compliant they are. So as an accountability measure, it would be nice if we had the opportunity to present our productivity measures to the Finance Committee, and then as we sophisticate the other measures, we'll bring those forward too.
Great.
Question on that too. As you're looking at other spaces, their productivity, is there that potential for the larger discussion of whether or not resources need to be I don't want to say moved, because I feel like we say it all the time, like get changed over here to there, but whether or not certain roles or certain tasks need to be, someone may be overwhelmed with 19 million things, and so they can only do one or two.
Yeah, so this philosophical conversation about, we are a decentralized district. So unlike other districts, our budgets are managed at the school level or at the department level. And, when they had the University of Washington in here, I talked a lot about financial compliance and the skill set that's out there. And, I finally came to the conclusion that principals are trained as professionally, educationally as instructional leaders, and that's their primary responsibility. And so they don't necessarily have the financial skill set to manage $12 or $15 million of taxpayer dollars, to stay on top of all the ever-changing rules by the state, federal grants, governments, IRS, retirement system. And so we have a pilot that we did last year. We called it SPOT, standard for Supply Procurement Operations Team. We took 2 accountant positions and converted them to these SPOT people, and they actually do the financial transactions on behalf of the school. So the school's still the decision maker, but we take care of how many quotes do you need and process all that, enter the requisitions form, do all the financial compliance checks. And it has gone extremely well. And they're expanding to,
They have 9 schools now.
9 schools. And so in order to, I think maybe what we can do is bring results back here, and because it may become a budgetary issue, we need to increase that to bring more schools on. Because there's only 2 people making.
Hopefully it would pay for itself.
Well, and I'm thinking of possibly shifting some of the school treasurers. Some of the school treasurers are kind of fighting this because they feel like we're taking their job away from them. So it might be more of a retraining and a redirecting of their work to be spot-like.
Well, you know how I feel about the school treasurers. I think they're supposed to report to the, and that's not the culture we have.
That's right. That's not the reality.
But I think that I don't know that we can centralize programming as much or centralize some of this other stuff, but indeed we ought to be able to centralize the financial house. That needs to be centralized in a better way.
Right. So this new budgeting methodology with the new superintendent and, with these measures and keeping track of these measures. I've been talking to, I'm not tracking this information to try to embarrass or get anybody in trouble, but I do have a responsibility to taxpayers to be a good financial steward, right? And so my desire is to develop and improve, not to embarrass or discipline. So we're going to baby step our way into that. But what I want to do is start working some of these measures into administrator evaluations, because there's always something about managing resources. It's not just people resources or community resources, but financial as well. So we're working towards that end.
So you want to keep that?
Yes, ma'am.
And then we actually get to our real line of business,
The
which is growth.
Market share and the enrollment, I think all suffered during COVID. And so
Right.
that might be, and we've not really tracked that in this committee meetings.
Right.
You can certainly do that if you so
I
want
think
to
we
keep it.
should, from a financial standpoint, and if it doesn't get tracked here, because it impacts budget, for goodness sake. It's being discussed in the ad hoc committee, enrollment and what have you, and maybe under-enrolled schools, the need for consolidation, that kind of stuff. But I'd rather keep it here in finance and try to make the case that it should be here. Brandon, what are your thoughts? I don't know where else to put it.
I think about it. I think it's depending on how you have the conversation, right? So like
Okay.
if we're talking about it in the sense of trying to expand enrollment and for those budgetary reasonings, I think it stays here. I think if it becomes a programmatic, what do we do now to expand enrollment?
Go to
That
Cal.
could go to the Cal.
I was
And,
just going
and
to
very
say,
frankly,
this
the enrollment piece is totally a policy issue.
this
so-
whole page is dependent on Cal and the next strategic plan.
Yeah.
So my recommendation would be that these get assigned to Cal.
Okay, well, let's keep going. I'll put a question mark by the first one. Is that fair?
Yeah, I actually do think if the measurements might come to us, like a reporting of where we stand and how that looks comes to us, but the work to get it there might be a Cal thing.
Yeah, I definitely think the second one, that 5.2, is a Cal thing.
Yep.
I would, and I
think
have a
3 is
question mark
actually
by
under.
the. I think 3 I'd keep only because transportation's here
You
and
know,
property is here.
I have a whole theory on this, like the greater transportation role of the district, but I do think with the ad hoc committee that currently exists, 3 might
Okay.
really fall there for
Mhm.
while that ad hoc committee is still in existence. Post ad hoc committee, it may fall back to us.
Okay.
Because I think that ad hoc committee will have
So
some.
it's a bleed, yes, but we're very careful about our charge, and that is just reviewing the elementary.
Before it's FPL.
Yes, before all else happens. But I think the first one I have a question about, the Cal for sure on the second. This ad hoc and finance, whatever, and then long range financial plan obviously stays here.
Of course, but you need a plan to fund, right, to financially plan.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
It's all about strategic.
Right.
And no matter what for all these other ones, there's no guarantee that all these other items that are not our responsibility are actually needing to be part of the strategic plan. But what absolutely has to be is the finance piece.
Right.
And associated finance
Right.
piece. Okay, well
So the next section are just the measures, and then
Yeah.
they'll get updated as
we're waiting for the administration on that one, right?
yes.
Okay, that's that next couple of pages. Excellent. All right, let's move on. Monthly financials.
Yes. Rob will pull up the PowerPoint for me. I am going to go over kind of the details in the overview slide.
Great.
And then we'll look at the graphs as well. But
Okay.
I do have a little more information on this slide this time, and so I kind of wanted to go through that.
Sure.
General fund cash balances. One of the things we talked about last month was the advances on property taxes. That has pretty well equalized due to the timing.
Okay.
One difference this month or this year, we did actually get our August settlement in August, where last year it was delayed till about September. So the timing, one of the things I didn't list on here is we've already been charged the county auditor fees, and those have been booked in September or in August, where last year they weren't booked until September. So still some timing things will flush out there, but basically that number did catch up. The other thing we talked a little bit about beginning fund balance. The main reason that was down is due to the additional fund advance money, trying to distinguish property and fund. The fund advance money that was used for ESSER to cover the negative while we were waiting on reimbursement from ODE. General fund revenues, you'll see when we get to that slide, property taxes and state foundation revenue are up slightly at this point compared to last year. Foundation in particular may flush out different as the year goes on, but at this point, comparing July, August this year, when they initially implemented the new funding last year, it's up slightly. For expenditures, overall they're up slightly. Some key differences that kind of anomalies I wanted to point out is I looked at lease purchase agreements for devices primarily. This year, those amortized costs actually got paid in August. And this year we actually used some ESSER funds as well. So I point that out because next month, when we look back at last year, in September, we made a lot of payments out of the general fund. This year, we made those payments earlier, so they bump up in August. But when we get to September, because we're using ESSER more this year at this point, there'll be some more differences.
So those expenses that you're talking about got moved later in the year. You remember we did a 90-day appropriation. So the ESSER fund, remember you didn't adopt the ESSER budget until August. So we use general fund to pay that stuff, and then we reimburse the general fund later on in the year. So I'm not sure if you were aware of that, Kevin, but
that makes sense. So, other professional technical services are up about $4 million. A little over $2 million is that we made the United Way payment related to preschool this month, or last year that first payment wasn't made until
well, it wasn't made at all because they had cash left over from the prior year. So we didn't have to make the first payment. But this year they almost ran out of money. Hector was calling me regularly to get that first September 1st.
We're about to all run out of money on preschool.
Yes.
And then just
how many years is that away? Maybe 2 years.
25 is when the levy comes out. Oh, yeah. This is between the 24 and 25 school year when the prior year carryover runs out. If we keep spending that the rate we're spending.
Which is my editorial comment, is that if this new agreement costs us more, even it's going to because of inflation and whatever.
I have an update from Mr. Hoying.
Well, when we get there, I'm telling you, these folks who want to add more things or spend more, we cannot adopt an agreement like that.
Well, we need to enforce the last dollar in because their fundraising has been almost nil.
That's right.
Not a criticism, the facts that are there, but we use last dollar in, so we're minimizing how much money is being spent out of the levy. But their budget continues to grow dramatically.
Yes, they need a fundraiser.
So the other item I indicated there was transportation costs in the general fund were up a little over $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think some of that is timing, shifting to ESSER, those kind of things.
I remember last year, at the beginning of the year, there was a big delay in the processing, and then they had to get caught up. So, yeah. Okay, moving on.
The T word.
And for the last two, I'll go over those as we get to this.
Okay.
So go to slide 4. This is the cash balance. Again, as I mentioned, mainly relating to the fund advances for ESSER that were done at the end of the year. Encumbrances are fairly consistent with last year. Next slide is the revenue. We've received about 32% of what we expect to receive for the year. As I mentioned before, a lot of that's because we've gotten half of our property tax revenue already. And in that first year, I've indicated about what the pass-through funding for community schools and the scholarships were included there. It's about $13 million at that point. Next slide breaks revenue down a little bit more by category. You can see the blue is taxes, We're about 3.8 million higher. Again, some of that may be the timing of the county auditor fees. So when we see September, they may be a little bit closer. The green is the state foundation, which is about 4 million up at this point. Next slide. This is a look at expenditures. Again, all those things we talked about related to mainly purchase services being some timing differences, etc.
Well, also the last 2 years, we were operating under a 90-day appropriation. So we were a little bit slower to spend money than we are this year.
Yeah, it's about a calendar.
Okay, and the next slide is one of the things, if you look back at July versus this month, our unallocated went from, I believe, about 9% down to about 6.5%. So more things have been encumbered and identified, at that point, either spent, encumbered, or otherwise. The salary and benefits, again, is really just a calculation of what we have budgeted for salary and benefits versus what we've actually paid at this point. And our working budget is $643.2 million for the general, which includes our carryover income. And they'll be going through a process of trying to close some of those, I think, at the end of September.
So that amount of money includes encumbrances?
Prior year encumbrances, so things that were obligated but not yet paid out. Now, we are having a little bit of a challenge with closing out last year's purchase orders because of supply chain issues. We're getting a lot of requests to hold POs open beyond where we typically do. So they're usually in existence for 90 days after the year. And we're doing that on a case-by-case basis, but everybody's experiencing delays. Here's the other thing. The most significant thing with state and federal funds, we can't hold those POs open. We have to close them and then reissue a new PO. So, for example, Hyde Park and Pleasant Ridge projects that we're using the ESSER funds for, they created a purchase order for multi-years. So on September 30th, we're going to have to close those POs and reopen them with the remaining balances. And it's going to be very delicate to communicate this with the vendors so they don't cancel projects on us. Right. But those are just the rules of the state and federal government.
Is that a conversation point that we will have with them, the state kind of explaining going forward how this has to work to understand what they're dealing with? Because ESSER was a 3-year grant, I think we thought it was okay to go that way, but now we know better, so we'll make that better. But yes, they can only create a purchase order for one one fiscal year's worth at a time, which is hard to do on a big project that's multi-year, right?
I can't even imagine one.
So, but we'll stay on top of it. We'll keep you.
The next section is school-wide pool. And as you're aware, we're not using that for fiscal year 23 going forward, but we are liquidating those contracts that were paid out through the summer.
It's a hard thing to kill, isn't it?
It'll take a minute, yes.
I'll give you some weapons.
Well, just remember, because we're on level pay, money that was earned last year on salary is being paid out in August, which is the new fiscal year. Mm-hmm. So we had to leave money in that fund to pay for that.
So on this graph, you can see July, August of last year was about 30 million, and this year was only 21. Part of the reason is because that extended pay only ran through the first payroll of August. So the second payroll of August was primarily FY23 contracts that were paid out of the general fund.
Right. Okay.
So that just kind of explains why that's different. We appropriated, or the board actually appropriated 30 million. I think that probably won't come in that high when we finish to close out the fund, but we want to make sure we had enough to satisfy that. Next section is preschool. And we have the tuition assistance summary. One of the things I did kind of want to point out here is in the middle there, this year we calculated assistance for about 722 students. Last year it was 635. And the year before was only 487 as we were coming out of COVID. And actually in that year, there was only 1 day of instruction in August. And then as we've gotten, I think last year was 7 days. So the number of days fluctuates based on how many.
Yeah.
Instructional days are in the month, yeah. And then the footnote down there that there's, at the end of the month, there was 1,593 total preschoolers. As of this morning, we were up to 1,725 that were in Business Pluses registered, so.
You know, that's important because we're getting that kind of report too about our kindergarten classes. That, you know, when we look at some of these low enrollments, especially in our elementary schools, we have to be careful how we plan for anything. If you've got these kind of a glut of, at least, thank goodness, you know, people might be coming back to us or new people might be coming, but that goes into the planning for sure.
One of the things in talking to the preschool folks is that from last year to this year, there were we were kind of heavy on the pre-K4 last year. So now a lot of those kids have moved on to kindergarten. And so, you know, we'll continue building back as the year goes forward. But I'm happy to see that those numbers were higher.
Yes.
Still.
As we start to think about especially the tuition assistance issue, you know, it's a different world when we're doing it for students and they're just now coming out of COVID and they haven't really, you know, some parents feel more comfortable, some parents feel less comfortable, that kind of deal. Like, where do we start measuring what's our norm, what's our benchmark to the expectation? You know what I'm saying? Like, the understanding, because I think to your point, we can't really look at fiscal year 21 because at 1 day in August, like all these factors destroyed what would be expected norm or what's the growth level that we expect to see kind of growing up there. Because to your point, that increases that budget, and that budget has to be paid by somebody.
Enjoy it. Or you have to reduce preschool.
And one thing we've tried to do here is we've added that third year to give some perspective. But again, it's a snapshot in time. I know they've gone through, preschool group has gone through projections and looking at tuition assistance really for the next 4 or 5 years. That's how we come to where we may be at the end of 24 and going into 25. So, and they'll continue to monitor that.
But
Sure.
that 722 is greater than pre-COVID numbers. I think pre-COVID we got up to 670, if I remember correctly. What I think is interesting, and I'd like to go back and look at, if you could for next meeting, Kevin, is the percent between full-time and half-time. It seems like the half-timers are growing.
Phyllis, if you'll make that part of the next month's agenda, comparison full-time, half-time.
Of course, we break it down by 5-star schools and 4-star schools. So I don't recall right offhand how that breaks down.
Right.
But I can certainly do that.
Well, this is a hard thing. This is going to be a hard budget issue.
Yes.
In 1 or 2 years.
Yes. Because the next slide, you can see.
Everybody loves it, and I'm sorry.
It pops out that we're anticipating $15 million in levy revenue to support preschool, and our budget's $19.5 million.
Yeah,
So that
let's just get
$3.6
real.
million is chewing into that prior year cash balance.
That I really need Finance House to make that very clear to the board that doesn't want to ever vote anything
Right.
against preschool.
So Kevin,
But this is now a problem.
could you add a slide so that we can just start every month reminding everybody about the cash carryover? Seeing, you know, I'm talking about that graph that we have.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's especially true, again, if we're talking about growth in preschool being something that is the expectation, right? And like, you know, we have parents who are going to now be utilizing these services on a more regular basis. So if that number gets up to 1,000 kids,
Right.
we are in a position where 1,000 kids is a lot to
But
figure out.
the purpose of this and the investment was to prepare them for kindergarten. So is that return on investment
Is that
playing
actually
out?
happening?
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's fair to do that. I think this chart actually also shows us if we need more if we have more students who need assistance to be in a preschool program, that's got to come out of somewhere. That's got to be someone's expectation. If it's having this great benefit, wonderful. we got to figure out how to still pay for it.
But we can use that to lobby for more financial resources from the state.
Well, yes,
preschool.
yes, you can if they care about preschool.
Right.
And the other piece of it too, again, to be able to do this, you're going to cut something else that's not working.
Mhm.
Again, people have to get
Yes.
ready for transformative budgeting.
My water bottle analogy.
Oh my Lord! I worry when Ben has 2 Diet Cokes. I'm starting to worry if you bring a Coke and water.
I wanted some fizz.
Caffeine.
Next
No, I
Monday,
just
Ben
wanted
might have
to-
3 days.
I know I will because I'm here to sit
As long as there's no rum in it, then we're all
and
good.
look totally ridiculous. But I do want to have a moment of editorial comment again, personal privilege. And if Greg Landsman is watching or his campaign chair, I thank you so much for you personally making preschool available to all the children in Cincinnati. Unbelievable commercial. Yeah, say I was a leader. Say I participated. I helped a movement. Oh my God, that commercial! I turn it off. And I love Greg, but I'm telling you, that's something. He personally did that. I feel good about it.
Okay. So you ready to move on to state federal grants? Ms. Hughes is going to be covering for Ms. Ty, who's on vacation.
Well, I don't know. Can you possibly do as well, even though one of your kids went to College Hill Fundamental? Did both of them do?
They
Both
did.
of them?
Yes.
I remember when it was so cute when they were sitting outside the office. Not of the school, they weren't being bad. They were outside.
I am a proud parent of 2 CPS
Shoot,
graduates.
well, I know
Yes.
that, and I know we get SCPA in the
We
mix.
got College Hill, Fundamental Academy, SCPA, and Woman.
That would be it.
Cover the whole gamut there.
Yep.
Well, and it was the center of the universe because it was College Hill.
Yes. That is the best elementary school.
But she did go to Swoop.
I know. I forgave her.
Okay. So this slide represents a summary of all of our federal and state grants. We have our public grants, which we have about 22 of them, and our monthly spend goal is 11%. So as you can see at the bottom in the gray area, we actually exceeded that by 2%. So and that is the actual spend, is 13% of us being able to meet our spend goal. We have about 10 grants that actually met that that actually met that 11% spend goal. Next slide, please. This slide represents our ESSER, and I will go into that in more detail in another slide. And it also represents our non-public school grants, which we have about 6 of those. Again, the spend goal is 11%, but within that, we've actually exceeded that as well, because it's actually 22%, as you can see down at the bottom, above the gray line, 22%. Next slide, please.
Bar charts.
Okay, this actually represents current and some historical data, and this is the overall grant spend. So as you can see in this one,
Significant improvement.
Mm-hmm.
for fiscal year 2021, the gray area, 2% for July and 7% for August in fiscal year 21. And for fiscal year 22, as you can see, it was 3% in July and 8% in August. And for this year, 7% in July and 13% in August. And we like to attribute that factor to us actually spending more time with our budget owners and in planning and executing how they're going to spend their federal fund dollars. So the grants team, they do a really good job of meeting with their budget owners to plan the federal fund dollars that they have access to. And they do it on a consistent basis. Some they meet monthly and some they meet with them on a quarterly basis. Next slide, please.
That's great.
This graph speaks to our ESSER funding. And it gives you the overall compared to what we've done in fiscal year 22. So the first two blocks in the graph, it represents the total budget for fiscal years 21 through 24. And this is a combination of all three ESSER funds and the expenses for all three for the years fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 24.
So, could you mind pause there for a second? So, we've been hearing a lot about schools not spending their ESSER funds. We're hearing a lot through the state and through, so that we're calculated, we're over 50% spent for the 3-year plan.
We know how to do it.
Yeah, so,
We know how to spend it.
yes, not a concern for us.
So for the fiscal year 22 budget, as you can see, the third block represents what our budget was for fiscal year 22, and the last block represents our expenditures for fiscal year 22. We will be able to start reporting out fiscal year 23 after our FERs are submitted, and they will be submitted at the end of the month, September the 30th. So we should be able to bring some information back to you in next month's.
And that's an unusual, it's unusual, it's not existing in the general fund. We're strictly a 12-month budget. But state and federal grants run on a 15-month cycle. And so once that 15-month ends is when we'll start reporting the new fiscal cycle.
And that concludes the grants portion.
Thank you, Kimberly.
So how many ESSER dollars do we still have? Anybody know?
Yeah.
Madam Treasurer.
Off the top of my head, about 150 million.
How much of that we already know how we're spending?
Well, you adopted a 3-year budget, so
Right.
but we need to
Readjust.
Yes, we need to readjust. So, I'm working with the superintendent on making sure that we're up. Well, we need the FERs to finalize, so I know exactly how much is left unspent in the previous year, so I know how to reallocate the rest. So it's kind of like this domino thing, but we're making progress.
All right, thank you.
No CRAs for this month.
Yes.
Good, good.
Thank you.
Thank
Happiness
you.
and joy there, right?
You did a fabulous job.
Excellent, excellent. Remarkable.
Okay, you want to talk about report card now?
Please.
Okay, so Rob, can you bring up that website?
This is fascinating. We might be inventing all different kinds of indexes
So there's
for
two.
being held accountable for something completely different.
There's two nuances while he's pulling that up to consider. One is when they compare us to what they call similar districts. It's any district that's over 10,000 students, and I think that's an unfair comparison. And you will see on one of the charts why. So if you look over, see the quadrant over to the right?
Mhm.
All the blue dots up there are the little bitty districts that are considered in our similar group, but all the major urbans are this bottom sector, and we're at the top of those. So we're not the least spent. So we're in that grouping. We're at the third least spent, but they're all really close. They're all within a couple $100 per student of each other. But we are the highest performing of the urbans. So the spend goes this way, and the performance goes this way based on what the state does. And then,
But what was published or posted last night?
last night it had us having zero spend. All our dot, red dot,
Yes.
was over to the zero side.
So
They
I
fixed
just-
that overnight.
Okay, that was concerning.
Yes,
Uh,
that was
Really
really. There's
bad.
probably 20 districts that were over there. Okay, so with the first measure up there, the 67 point, what that's saying is that we're spending 67% of our money inside the classroom versus not. Our operating funds inside versus outside the classroom. It's very similar to the bottom three comparison is the district, that comparison group, and then over to the right is compared to the state. And they're all fairly similar, right? So Rob, if you click on, scroll up a little bit. No, to the left where it says spending per pupil. There you go. So what this is showing us is that our operating spending for fiscal year 22 was $12,763 per pupil on average. The state's is not much less. That used to be, several years ago, the gap was much different.
to whose benefit for whoever's watching?
You
if
were much
anybody is.
more expensive than the rest of the state. And so that we've been able to or they're catching up to our level of spend, I guess, or we're both moving into the same, in different direction, closer to each other.
Okay, but would the public interpret that as that we are now spending less than we did some years ago?
Yes, and there's a variety of reasons for that. One is, Kevin, was the tuition part of that calculation, or was that an exclusion? The charter school. So that could be a nuance, because we spent $100 million a year on tuition for students to go to community or voucher schools.
I think we have to look into that, because depending upon, like last night, the people who may be supportive or unsupportive of our levy saw that thing last night that actually didn't look very happy. And that's what people kind of will keep, because they're not unaware about the update. But if it looks like we're spending less on kids compared to the rest of to the growth statewide, I'm just saying we have to anticipate how this can be interpreted negatively.
So two things. One is our classroom spending on a per pupil basis is 67.1%.
Mm-hmm.
The state's at 68%, so we're not that far off. But this is all indicative of how districts code their spending.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that there's one of the other urbans doesn't review how the schools code their functions, and the function is part of the logic. So the General Ledger Accounting Code has 10 different segments. One of the segments is the object code, which is the what. So is it salary? Is it mileage? Is it instructional supplies? The function tells you where you're spending it. Is it elementary instruction, secondary instruction, administration support? So if we're not consistently using those codes the same way, it changes this calculation. But this is a picture of the logic they use, of what they include and what they don't, and where they put it. So what we need to do is marry
and it's dependent in part on self-reporting.
Yes, it's all self-reported.
So that's part of the.
And one mistake, coding mistake, could really significantly change the comparative data. So, and then ESSER is included in this, and we all are spending our ESSER money very differently. Mm-hmm. So that has an influence on this as well. So I think the state should probably go into a little bit more explanation on how this is all done so that people understand the data. If you flip over to the source of funds, this is a revenue. What I want to point out here is significant is that our local share is 46%, while the state average is 42%. So our local taxpayers make up more of our revenue source than the rest of the state. And if you look at the federal, 22% versus 15%, that tells you about our federal monies, which are allocated based on our student needs. So our student needs are more significant and need more funding than the state average.
Wait, I'm just thinking about this also from perspective of, the state percentage of state revenue for our district, and also as a facet of how the state calculates what our district gets.
Yes, the wealth index.
And so at some levels, the more they see you as being in a wealthy area, the less percentage you will have, as opposed to maybe a lower income or a rural district that might have a huge ton of their money coming from state levels.
Well, what's unfair about it, and they're trying to figure it out, but it's not even just our own wealth. It's the wealth relative to the rest of the state. Mm-hmm. So one district could lose a major property or income source, like the pipeline was going to have a major impact. So if they got poor because they lost something like that, that would make us richer, and nothing could have changed for our economics. And so that means our state share goes down.
Well, we talk in terms of the similar districts on the phone. I mentioned this to you because comparing us to Fairfield or whatever, it's all weird. So I think traditionally we have compared ourselves to the 8 largest urbans.
Correct.
And to the 21 or 22 or 23 school districts in Hamilton County. That's all we need to worry about right now. That's the comparison we've used. That's what we've ridden when we say we're the top urban or we're this or we're that. And those are our competitors.
Right.
Because Hamilton County has more high-performing school districts than any other county in the state of Ohio. And it's an interesting,
Right.
it's pretty interesting.
So we're going to take, I'm trying to get the data, the downloaded data, because
Right.
otherwise I have to print every individual school report card out, and then I would have to go to the Hamilton County and print all those out, and then type it all into a spreadsheet. So I'm trying to get a download of that information so that we can do some of this analytics.
Well, I know next month we're going to want to see those comparisons
Yes.
that you put together for
Yes.
for Hamilton County and for the 8 urbans. I think too, this now remarkable piece that they have where all of the schools are listed individually, that comparison is going to be probably more pursued than anything else on the state report card, because people are going to be claiming, well, see, you're spending less money on my child than you are on that other
But
in that other
that goes
school.
to the whole equity piece.
Sure does.
The other children, it costs more because they might have a larger population of students with disabilities who can, in some cases, cost significantly more. When you only have 6 kids in a classroom,
Yeah.
with a teacher and an aide and assistive technology, it's going to be more costly than
Well,
child-
finishing
classroom-
that up,
Right.
that's why that's going to be the initial comparison and criticism. But that listing can really help us communicate equity.
yes.
And when you, like, I know every time we say, well, Walnut, yeah, that's right, but it's our most financially, what's the word?
Economies of scale.
Economy of scale,
Yeah.
and it's I just think that use that list, but also we might reveal some things that we maybe haven't done right.
Or, yeah, an opportunity to improve.
I think there's also, to one extent, doing the comparisons is good so we can be able to explain. I think the other part to it is the explanation itself has to provide information. So, like, for instance, Board Member Bolton was going early in the question was, is that amount that we're spending today per student less? Or are others spending more? And if we've always spent this great amount, right, and we've always been spending up here, and folks are growing with us and growing up there to catch up with us, it's a lot better explanation than to a parent who says, well, now y'all spend, you used to spend 15, now you spend 13. Or what does 15 versus 13 mean? Because I think that is the hard part about data, is that data tells a snapshot image. The story that goes with the data, the explanation that goes with the data tells the better picture.
Well, the other phenomena about the per pupil spend changing and getting less is because our enrollment has grown, right? Administratively, you're going to have less spend per pupil because your administration doesn't necessarily grow that fast with enrollment growth.
Yeah. Or, again, if you have the school where you add one more student to it, that per student goes down, you're not likely to spend any more dollar.
Right.
And that gets into providing both the data that maps out what we were talking about here, and so we have the identity, the idea of what's going on, and then the explanation of what that data, the factors that are part of that data, and what that data means.
Well, the other piece, going back to the very beginning of the meeting, you all having a philosophical discussion to kids with particularly more challenges cost more. I can end that conversation right now. Yes. I'd hate to find out they don't, because, and they deserve, so I'm just saying, let's I don't know how much you want to keep talking about that.
No, but we will continue. No, it's just.
No, it's cool. It's
Yes,
cool that you have to think in those terms, kind of starting point, but it's like.
But the data just came out and it got corrected overnight, so we are going to spend some significant time in the next couple weeks getting this historical and the story that goes behind it.
Can you find more mistakes that make it look better? I know the academic team is trying to do that.
Do our best to analyze the data at hand.
And we will talk about this again on this coming month. Okay.
I did look, Jen, at the
Good.
21 database, and it does not include those tuition items.
Okay, so that's an exclusion?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Now, I just started to print off, just randomly, I print off 2 schools, and I won't name them, but one school, the per pupil spend was $12,991, and the other school was at $13,715. So almost 1,000 per child higher. One of them happens to be a foreign language school with a lot of diverse
Yeah.
speakers, and the other one is a
gonna be
neighborhood
tool
school.
to explain equity.
Yes.
But yeah, well, but that goes into you have programming, right? And so when we talk about when we look at it in a data point and say, okay, 13 and 12, that's one thing. If 13 is getting you these different programming and they have these things going on that the other school does not, there is that question of is there an opportunity to provide those services or okay, look into programming at that school, but it's also an explanation of this is
So we need to
we're
look at
doing
the class sizes per building, because some neighborhoods have different challenges, right? But the class sizes per building and then the English language learners compared to these two schools will be significantly different.
Yes, and you have right now, you have the instructional part of the district going through and trying to do what they're calling an audit of programming,
Yes.
meaning instructional programming.
Mhm.
So all of this can come together, and that's why this new effort and the new strategic plan is going to be much more greatly. And
And the return on investment to help drive that
Yeah.
decision making.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. Excellent. Okay.
update on
Facilities. Yes. So, I have a little chart. I'll send it to you. I just received the data overnight, but so there's 4 projects that are underway and that were directed by the board for us to do. The Walnut Hills Dome is 85% complete. Its anticipated completion date is November 1st. So what are you going to cut out of the ESSER budget to fund for those projects?
issue is.
Well, I know we've been spending a lot of money on like the planning and design and that kind of
Well,
stuff.
let's start building.
So I will come back with more detailed information.
Okay, and then I'm interested in knowing then how much money because of
For
these
each project?
the additional amounts of money.
Okay.
And then the cafeteria piece, the cafe, I know we already told Walnut they weren't getting the addition. And I know we've committed to the cafe, and I think that's good, but, we've got other things that need construction as well, which is why we weren't doing the
Right.
expansion for Walnut. So ESSER money, how much ESSER money is left, how much construction money is left, and we need to have a sense of what still might be on the table down the road and you have to figure out where we get more money.
Yep. Okay. Transportation. My notes on transportation say the status of the Metro agreement. So the agreement was complete, but they're unable to obtain specific ridership data because the FRID cards aren't in use
And
yet.
I will guarantee you they won't be ready for the whole year.
8
They
to
don't
12
wanna
week
even tell
delivery
us.
is what I'm being told.
Mm-hmm.
And so just so everybody understands, the RFID is the radio frequency ID, so that when a student gets on the Metro bus and scans, they can measure ridership. Right now, it's kind of a guess because of their passes.
Just
So,
like last year.
yes. We don't know of any budget changes at this time as a result of the beginning of the year, the routing and all that kind of stuff yet. So we're monitoring that. And then the bus fleet update, they're starting to write an RFP to obtain official quotes and timeline expectations. So we'll keep that.
And will
informed.
that be, we want to see the RFP as what they're really talking about regarding a fleet, whether there's yellow, whether there's vans, whether there's both, whether there's
Okay.
whatever. And that should come back to finance.
Okay.
I do think there needs to be, I think both with the understanding of whether it's buses or vans, but also understanding the cost of the additional things that would come with the difference is, right? So
Yes.
Exactly.
having to have someone who has to have a CDL to drive the students
Right.
around is a different cost than a
Well-
15-passenger van or something.
So where are you going to store these vehicles? We don't have a
Yeah.
garage anywhere. So that's going to be significant, and the maintenance on that.
Well, I will also
But-
say that the big bus companies don't have garages either. They don't have the old, as my mom would call it, car barns.
I understand. Well, they
They
have
just park them in a parking lot.
big, I know, but they're gated with security and staff to monitor all that, and then you have maintenance barn, you know.
Sure, oh, that should be all
garages.
part of the cost.
Right.
I'm not refuting that. I'm just saying we don't need to make it be so
I just-
costly as to.
Well, I think though it's the reality of
Here's the reason we're not doing it
it's
again.
not just the buying of the
Exactly.
Total
bus
cost
with
of
the van.
ownership, yes.
Just like the van thing, you have to, the size van that's in the Ohio Revised Code, in the transportation part, says, which vans, what, you don't need CDLs. So that's your coaches driving the people or staff getting more money or what have you. But if you're going to buy a van that requires a CDL, your yellow buses are going to need it. So,
Yep. Okay.
cool.
Um,
But in transportation, did you finish your list?
yeah, that was the bullets that were given to me.
Right, again, the distinct number for Metro is very important to me.
Distinct
the
number of
distinct
student
ridership.
riders? Yeah.
Because again, that is not what they could not give us all last year. And if we're waiting on a card or something to be able to do that, it seems like they have enough money that they could, I think we were even helping them with their cards. I think that was part of the agreement that we would help purchase. So that is it. And Ben is interested in us having a list for the board priorities list within transportation. I give that over to you, Jen. And
Right,
for transportation, it's distinct and it's also on time.
Percent of students with greater than one transfer,
Yes.
and percent of students who arrive on time for school.
And to add that now, we add the distinct ridership
Distinct
regarding
riders.
the cards. If you don't mind, I'd like to add too, I would like to see the tardy and absentees for high schools for the Metro piece.
And I know that there is a new, because I got the call in the email about it, but there's a new transportation rollout or changes rollout on the Monday, right? The 19th?
Oh, the reroutes, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, again, these are those conversations that we'll have to have after that as well as to how has that distinctly changed the on-time percentages, these type of things, the tardiness things. But I think that's a,
So these measures, is the request for them to come to a business meeting at night or come back to finance committee? Just want to be clear.
It's the business meeting where we, every night, every business meeting, we
meeting.
go through the target piece.
Okay, I will make sure to communicate that.
yeah, I know some of
Can
those
you
were
think of
already.
any of the others? Anything else for transportation?
I know Ben gave the on time, and then I think he wanted at the board meeting he asked for this, and then I also asked the question around the distinction between being like 5 minutes late, like the short period of late versus substantially late. But I think that's something that he and the superintendent can kind of figure out that conversation around.
Yeah,
Okay.
well,
Okay,
Okay,
all right, so,
that's that list.
okay, the master agreement. This is Dan's statement. He cannot be here either. I have received feedback from the treasurer and the early childhood office, and I am working on a draft to present back to CPP. We are not recommending changes to the current structure or agreement and recommend the status quo continue while the revised MOU is finalized. Period.
That's good because they're saying that whatever our cash drawdown is, well, that'll continue, but we're not adding to the cash drawdown.
Correct. But I thought I told him, maybe I didn't, meeting that, because when we had the meeting weeks ago, about formalizing the fundraising requirement.
Yes, and I do know too that President Lindy and Julie Sellers have talked about some aspect of the Workforce Development Council not coming back in its entirety, but somehow They seem very committed to some aspect of it. It's currently a work group that's working to do certain things. So it's right. We need to just add back to the general counsel that is a concern of both the CFT and president of the board. Not anywhere near where it was. And I think some suggestions are going to be made as to what the new thing could be.
Okay, so let me write this down. President Lindy
And Julie Sellers.
recommending.
I think it's really just the discussion about what the
Return
workforce
of
workforce development component is going to look like.
Right, and and people were talking about.
Redesign the work.
Not giving it a specific.
Yeah, it's a work group. We're not paying for that territory twice. It's a work group, and they're going to help. They have some suggestions, perhaps.
Okay. We'll pass that on.
What else do we have under other business, and what are we resolved to be talking about next month? We have started a list of, between you and Phyllis, what we look at next month. I know we're gonna.
Yes, I mean, I can start. You want to add to it?
Yes.
So bringing back the financial analysis on the report cards. The ESSER, how much is left, and what's the recommendation on how to spend it. Recommending some modifications to the levy materials.
Mm-hmm.
Passing on, that's not really for next month, but the transportation measures, that's for the board meeting.
Right.
Oh, we were adding for Kevin to add the percent of half-time versus full-time
Yes.
schoolers, and then the slide on the carryover spending, carryover balances, unspent cash. Did I miss anything, Phyllis?
How much additional monies and facilities that we've committed to? I mean,
Yes. Update. I have that on here.
Really update on the dollar amounts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dollar
Thank you.
Dollar changes.
And equity budgeting, yes.
That's the equity index. You're going to come
Yes.
back and report.
And the RFP, the transportation RFP.
Yes. Oh, good. We can just sit here for a month.
Now, was there anything
We're ready with the new agenda.
Do you want? You can sit for a month. Do you want anything updated on this to come back?
Yeah, I would suggest that we list the goals so that it can be put in the minutes for the rest of the board to see and remind the other chairs that they're supposed to be doing it with their committee.
Okay.
And it's the ones that we know we want to keep. It's the one maybe we had a question mark about, one we thought might have to
Okay, we can
go
do a
to Cal's.
recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
I think that would be important. And if nothing, it'll start the dialogue.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything that per se we would have a discussion around, other than if there's something that comes up in one of the other committees that.
Yeah, see how it aligns.
Yeah.
See how it aligns.
Good.
And we know the comparisons we care about.
Yes, the Urban 8 and the Hamilton County.
Period.
Hey, people.
Any people to speak? We do a good job.
Do we have any people online?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're watching. Nobody to speak. How many people we have watching? I love it. Hello to all of
It
you.
was 7 at one. We couldn't stick around.
Oh, okay. That's good for us. I know when I was on Mount Healthy City Council, we always counted it a great day when nobody came to say anything because you must be doing something right.
Oh, the other topic under other business would be the next financial town hall is November 29th, and we'll be talking about forecast.
Oh, let me ask you about forecast. What for the next month? in October. Shouldn't that be on the agenda?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Glad you said the F word. I've got the.
You've been taking your meds today.
No, and I haven't had any Coca-Cola or anything. I've got the T word. That's the real nasty word. Transportation. And then we've got the F word. Forecast.
Forecast. That's a good thing.
That's a good thing. Well, as long as we're ready and we say goodbye to the folks that have been watching, thank everybody for all the work they do. And everybody have a great weekend and a good month until we see y'all again. We are adjourned.